Like, no, they went through 2 years of missed birthdays, 2 Christmases, 2 Thanksgivings, like 2 New Year's, 2 of all of the holidays and all the things that they would have been getting phone calls about or get visits for or all these other things. There were things that we didn't get to share. 2 years. I'm a little bit, more enthusiastic about this episode than the first one, if you recall, way back when.
Way back yonder.
Yeah, I hardly wanted to even start this conversation. And, I was like, I just want to, talk about happy or funny things. We didn't really have our dynamic yet. It was so awkward.
Were we even that good of friends then?
They definitely weren't friends that we are now. But, yeah, I don't know, man. Lots changed since that episode. A lot has changed since that episode. We didn't have our voice yet, man. Like, so much has changed, and it's like, all the expectations that we had just got like blown out of the water, and now the podcast has like a pretty decent following, and I feel like we're 2 totally different people at this point. And so I guess that's kind of a good segue to say that this episode is about going no contact with toxic family members and what that looks like after reconnecting. Because at this point, it's been 2 years. It's been 2 years solid. I went 2 years straight with having no contact with my parents specifically, including my dad's parents. And wow, what a process that has been. So I'm here now to, recap, kind of give you guys an idea of what that's looked like and what it could look like. For context,
yeah, it's been like 9 months between that episode and now.
Yeah, so like at the time of recording the episode, it had been a little over a year, and now it's been 2 years.
Yep. Which is, I'd say, a good amount of time for things to have changed and happened and occurred for you.
Yeah, well, and a lot's changed, right? Like, it's just been night and day different. So I guess, to revisit that episode, we talked about, my process of what led up to me going no contact with my family, and maybe some reasons why you, the listeners, may have gone no contact with some family members, and what that can look like. And at the time I was like, hey, this is definitely a thing for now. I don't think it's going to be a forever thing. I hope it's not a forever thing. And wouldn't luck have it, it wasn't forever.
Nope.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it went the way that maybe some of you guys thought it would have. So we're here to talk about that, and talk about a little recap on what happened, and talk about maybe some of the reasons why you could go no contact with some family members. And the truth is, you don't really have to have like, the super long-winded and justifiable and completely rational list of reasons why you go no contact with anyone. It doesn't even necessarily have to be family members. It's just definitely family members in my case here.
Friends and family is what we were discussing.
Yeah, friends and family. It can be anyone. So, I know that kind of saying, oh, well, you don't have to have, these justifiable reasons kind of sounds harsh. And especially when it comes to family, it's like, oh, they're your family, but I'll die on this hill, like I did in the first video, that you do not have to tolerate extra abuse or crossing of boundaries or risk your safety, both physically or mentally, for people just because they're your family members. That is absolutely not true. I still will die on that hill. So with that being said, if your emotional or physical safety is in jeopardy, carte blanche, bye. Definitely justifiable for going no contact. And, some other reasons might be as if you've attempted to set boundaries. It's kind of like my situation. I tried to set some boundaries as were crossed consistently. And then, that was my reason for going no contact. If you've voiced things that hurt you and nothing changes, and people have heard your pleas for help or for change, and then that change doesn't happen, that's a reason for going no contact. There could be a million different reasons why maybe you decide that going no contact with anyone is the best situation for you. But the point is that doing what is best for you is what will ultimately lead you to a place of self-discovery and healing. So, to touch base back on my situation and how that came to be, when I went no contact with my parents, I needed a blank slate. I was seeing certain patterns in my life, certain patterns of hardship, specifically in my romantic life, actually. And it was kind of hard to know where these habits and patterns were coming from when all I had was that baseline with my family and with my parents, and that baseline of like what their love looked like and what my parents' relationship looked like and how they navigated difficulties and how they problem solved and how they, navigated difficulties in their relationships with us, their kids, and with other people around them, right? And so it's like really hard to get a foundation, or like it's really hard to gather this information or make informed decisions when your baseline itself is one that resides in just tumultuous relationships or inconsistency or chaos. So it's like hard to form new ideas when your environment is only set in these set of ideals and morals, right? So that's kind of how it went for me. And I know that in the first episode you talked about, you can't even imagine doing this with your family, so maybe it doesn't touch base quite as much with you, but maybe
not with family.
Yeah, not with family.
What I realized, just looking back and kind of looking at our notes here, I found the strength to go no contact with two particular people. And, you miss aspects of them, and you sometimes wonder, like, well, it would be nice to have them back. And I was talking to you about one particular person. I was like, I'm thinking I might reach out, right?
Yeah.
And realistically, I went no contact because I changed, not because I knew they were changing. They were just not good for me at the time. And I acknowledged, like, you know what? I can maybe give them a chance now, but there's also no real need. You can just have memories. It's okay sometimes.
Yeah, that's fair.
And there were one very important person to me, one mildly important person to me. And it's just a weird thought process. Like, again, I can't relate to on the family thing.
Yeah.
But definitely with friends or people that were close to at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was interesting. Actually, one of the people reached out to me today.
Really?
Yeah, it was very mild. They were asking a question, and in my head I was like, I glanced over it. It didn't hit me hard.
Yeah.
It didn't hit me like, oh, hope, or like I didn't care.
Really?
And that was really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the aspect too, right? It's like, so you have your reasons, right? And again, these don't need to be, reasons that are like blatantly justifiable or like, don't get me wrong, there are certainly reasons that exist like that. Again, to reiterate, your physical or your mental health at stake, or your safety at stake, or the fact that you just need like a restart and you don't know where to start solving your problems, right? Like, there's all kinds of reasons why maybe you go no contact. And with me specifically, with my family, like I said, I had my reasons, and, we could sit here and we could talk for hours and hours and hours just simply on the reasons why I went. But that's not necessarily the focus of this episode. If that's more of what you're looking for, check out our other episode where I did kind of go more into depth.
Contact.
Yeah.
Which I'm very curious about that. I'd love to hear your opinions on, like, did you change your mind?
Well, of course, yeah. So, 2 years go by, and during that process, I think the misconception with making that decision ultimately to go no contact really gets misconstrued, right? Like, especially when you tell people that don't really have like the context, or they don't have like the understanding. I think one of the most misconstrued things about, finally making that decision and saying, hey, I'm going to go no contact, is that, people immediately jump to like, oh my gosh, how could you, how harsh, how heartless of you to just like completely exile, your parents, your brother, your sister, any family, family members specifically, definitely get that extra like, oh my gosh, why? How could you? Like a friend, it's like, oh yeah, the friendship didn't work out. This is not a really super healthy dynamic. Oh, that's okay. Sorry, your buddy didn't work out. But when you're family, it's like people are like,
I struggled with that concept for you, man.
For sure.
Because I just couldn't relate to you.
Right.
I don't understand what it's like to have an upbringing that wasn't good,
or that was just like bad enough to justify going no contact, right? So like that's the thing about people and kids of parents that decide to go no contact. Like, believe me, this is not some kind of decision that some kid just wakes up and goes, you know what, I've had enough, or you know what, they made me mad today, I'm just going to exile them and completely remove them from my life. Like, no kid wakes up and wants to do that, especially like a kid to their parent, right? Like, it's a really odd dynamic to be in where you feel like you as a person and for your mental health or your physical safety, regardless of the reason, like that you need to completely exile your birth givers and the people that raised you from your life. Like that is a horrific conclusion to have to come to as any person, but especially as a child, right? Like, you know, no matter how old we get, like it's still, there always is a child-parent dynamic, right? And so like that was the absolute last, that was the last-ditch effort for me, right? Like I made attempts before going no contact. Like I did try other things, as does everybody who goes no contact, right? Like
I watched you go through that pain.
Yeah.
And through your attempts at like recovery.
Yeah.
That was a painful thing to watch, realistically.
Yeah.
I've watched you try and go and talk to them and come back so frustrated and annoyed.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember like trying to give you some advice about it, and ultimately it just came down to like, if they won't move,
right,
there's nothing you can do.
Right.
And I think I was pretty supportive on the whole no contact thing for you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Because but even with my lack of understanding of it, the only concept I can understand in that is that person A isn't responding to person B. Person B is putting effort towards person A.
Right.
It cannot be one way. That's all I've got.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, when I say I'll die on the hill of you don't have to like allow or like raise your thresholds to this unrealistic place just because people are family members. It's because, you know, they are people just like anyone else, right? And, you know, the relationship with them takes just as much effort as any other relationship would. You know, like I think that sometimes that's the place where people get caught up and they think that, you know, oh, that's just my son, or that's my mom, or that's my dad. I don't have to put as much effort into it because like they should just love me unconditionally anyway. And like, while there is something to be said about that, and I think that there naturally are just at least a little bit higher thresholds for parents to love their kids and vice versa. Like
I'd say a lot higher threshold.
It still takes that effort, right, to maintain a good, solid relationship. Like for me personally, there's not enough meat on the bone to say, oh, well, it's just my dad, so I'm going to let everything go. I'm going to overlook every single boundary they cross that I've asked them not to, or I'm going to overlook and negate every red flag that they have, I guess, if you would call that. You know, like that's just not a healthy dynamic to have. You know, like we it's unnecessary to adopt unhealthy relationship dynamics just because someone is related to you. That is preposterous. So, again, though, that's a recap. And I think, you know, again, the primary point of this episode is to say, hey, I did go no contact. I went no contact for 2 years. And just to clarify, this didn't mean like no contact and like I still called on the holidays, or like no contact and no I still like called once in a while, or maybe a text. Like, for clarification, I changed my cell phone number and they were blocked on all social medias. Like, nobody could get a hold of me. Not a single person.
That's intense.
Yeah. I changed my phone number.
I knew you were no contact. I just didn't know to what extent. I didn't even know if they tried to reach out to you. You wouldn't have known.
Nope. Couldn't do it. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but just a brief little side quest. Rain. Yeah, it is raining. I hope you guys can hear it. This is very relaxing. Oh, you can definitely hear it.
It's beautiful out.
Yeah. That's so cool. But yeah, anyway.
Let the rain wash away your pain and suffering.
So, you know, the question becomes this, right? I got to a point.
And just for context, I'm more of a viewer on this podcast today.
That's
I'm watching the journey more than I am contributing to it.
Yeah.
I have small ideas and concepts for it, but like, this is really Devon's journey.
Yeah, that's all right. And yeah.
That's notice me a little quiet. There won't be too many of those memorable 15-second clips where I look at you deep and give you something that'll just wreck your life. That's Devon's turn.
Right. That's all right. I'm glad to be in the spotlight for this, man, because I think there's a lot of healing to be had in this conversation, right? Like, I think a lot of people will gravitate towards this episode with, the agenda to be validated in their feelings. And believe me, I'll validate you. Believe me, I again, just to reiterate from the beginning of this episode, you don't have to have some kind of like decorated, like, oh my gosh, you definitely should go no contact. Like, if you feel like there is reason to go and that you could benefit from it, like, make the decision. Be willing to deal with the consequences of going no contact, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this episode. But like, go no contact if you feel like it's what you need to do, right? Like, you don't need to sit here and justify it to everybody. So all this being said, the question really comes down to this. It's been 2 years. Maybe for you, it's been...
And I can't remember. It's been 2 years?
Oh, yeah. Are
you sure?
Positive, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah, April of 2022 was when I went no contact.
Cool, because I remember you and I talking about it. We discussed your potential options, alleyways. I swore, and I'm glad we're not using my memory for this.
Yeah.
But I swore that like you were going no contact when we were discussing it.
I had been no contact. Yeah, I had been no contact. April of 2022.
You remember that day, huh?
I don't remember the exact day. I know it was April of 2022, though. Yeah. So, for me, it was a little over 2 years, actually.
Okay. Had you gone to visit them or anything, or
no?
Okay, I'll have to go revisit the episode, but okay.
Fair enough. So for me, it was a little over 2 years. For you, the listener, it might be 10 years, might be 20 years. You might have just started considering going no contact, but regardless of that, like, the question becomes what is the catalyst, or what should be the catalyst for breaking the no contact, right? Is there a time frame where you say, okay, it's been X amount of time and now I'm ready to break no contact? Or do you say, some relationships, should they just stay dead, right? And,
it's a tough one.
Sorry to break it to you guys, but I do have the typical therapist answer, or the typical, umbrella statement of, it depends. And it really does. It really seriously depends, right? Like, for, if you're, considering breaking no contact, consider these things. And I think this will help you make that decision on whether or not to decide to break your no contact. Have these family members or friends, we talked about friends too. What have they done in the meantime, during that time of no contact, right? Like, have you heard more horror stories of how they've sabotaged and ruined even more relationships outside of yours? Well, okay, maybe a sign to not do that. So
that one is actually the thing that uses my crux, right?
Yeah.
Like I've been in this weird, uncomfortable state lately.
Yeah.
Like shifting the faces that are commonplace for me, right? And that's been weird. And every once in a while I do hear a thing here or there from those people I've got no contact with.
Yeah.
And they have their wins, but they still have the same losses. And that one just becomes a very reminder that that's not required to come back.
Exactly. Right. So that's a really important part to pick up on. What does their life look like in the meantime? And I don't want to say that there's good or necessary time frames, but arguably 2 years is I feel like a reasonable time. That gave my parents enough time to really, harsh, I guess, but to really feel the consequences of their actions, right? It wasn't I went a couple months and I missed a birthday or something. No, they went through 2 years of missed birthdays, two Christmases, 2 Thanksgivings, 2 New Year's, 2 of all of the holidays and all the things that they would have been getting phone calls about or get visits for, or all these other things. Events in their life happen, big things happen in their life, there were things that we didn't get to share. 2 years. So I'm not suggesting encouraging, but I would.
And it's not supposed to be a punishment. You're not punishing the person. You're simply taking back some power for yourself and giving yourself time to heal. And if they choose to take that time to better themselves, to hopefully better the relationship with you, it just gives you more ammunition to say this is worth coming back to.
Right, exactly. So these are some of the things to consider, right? Have they surrounded themselves with people that just have a pity party? I will say that that's one of the most common things I see with parents who have kids that have gone no contact with them. Some, not all obviously, but some parents, they'll surround themselves with friends or other parents whose kids have gone no contact with them, and instead of collectively, contemplating, hey, wonder why our kids went no contact with all of us, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I just can't believe they would ever do that to you, you're so sweet. And it's not even considering the kind of dynamic that parent and their child would have versus the relationship that parent has with that person in particular.
It's a lack of self-awareness.
Oh yeah.
And I gotta give this man a compliment right here, because I got a text midday from him saying, hey buddy, what would you say are my red flags? And
oh boy. That was a doozy.
And I gotta say that it takes a certain amount of self-awareness to be willing to ask the question, to be willing to hear the answer, and then not argue back when you're getting the answer you don't want.
Oh, yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I was definitely, like, I walked into that thing, I was prepared. I was not prepared for what you said, but I am glad that I asked that question. Sincerely, I am glad that I asked that question. That helped me grow, like, exponentially, man. I'm really glad I asked you that question.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic of you.
Yeah.
And I probably should ask you someday about that question. It won't be anytime soon, though. Just kidding.
No, I don't.
But, you know, the people that you've gone no contact with probably lack that ability to be self-aware.
At the time, yeah.
And that may have changed. But usually when you go no contact with them is when you notice they lack that self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's tough.
And it did for a while. You know, I'll be honest, man. There for a while, like they were not picking up what I was putting down, man. It was definitely like the pity party, which is like a reasonable reaction. I will credit them. Like, I would not say it's something that, ooh, it's raining so hard. I love it.
That was thunder.
Yeah, I know.
Thunder. Bring the thunder.
Yeah.
Lightning and the thunder.
You know, but they did lack that self-awareness for a while, and a reasonable reaction to kind of like have that pity or have that, like, you know, time to grieve the action of their, you know, the consequences of their actions. So like, and I'm not here to crucify them over that, but some other questions that maybe would, you know, justify or at least, you know, have you ponder, is this worth breaking no contact for? Should I... Wow. I hope this isn't too loud, this rain.
We'll find out soon enough.
Yeah. But some other questions to ask yourself is this. Have they taken accountability in the meantime? You know?
That's a tough one.
Oh.
But you hope for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. You hope. Which, to my parents' credit, thanks, guys. They did take accountability. Bravo.
Maybe there is a moment I can speak to the camera here and say that one of the best things you can do for yourself and that people can do for themselves to bring into another person's life is to just take brutal self-accountability.
Yep.
A whole new life is sitting and waiting for you.
Ooh, yeah.
On the other side of self-accountability and self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You do that to a painful extent,
you
will be a different person with different experiences and different relationships in your life from there on out.
Absolutely. Ask this question to yourself. What role am I playing in my own suffering?
In the suffering of others.
Yep. No freaking doubt. So, you know, ask yourself that question. Have they taken accountability for the things that you've told them has hurt you? Maybe have they went to therapy? By the way, huge green flag.
Huge green flag.
Green flag.
Which, by the way, I'm very curious.
Yes.
Because I know you're alluding to it.
What?
But, like, what is the conclusion with your folks? What has come of this?
Oh, I was getting there. But
I know.
I have reestablished contact. And I'm going to talk about some of those other things and, like, what that might look like later on. But, yes, the short answer, yes. We can have our cake now, I suppose.
Yes.
We can have our cake now. Yes, I did reestablish a relationship and started that process of reestablishing that relationship with my parents.
What did it take for you to give you that?
Accountability. You know, some of these things, right? Like, they took accountability. They went to therapy. We're all in therapy as a group right now.
But how? If they were blocked, how did this get across to you?
This is something that I just heard, you know, through the grapevine, and I knew I would hear, right? Like, I'm in contact. I'm very close with my siblings. My sister is still in contact with my parents. Like, there wasn't a situation where I had, like, absolutely no way to have any kind of tabs on my parents. And, like, I knew I would always have that, right? I just didn't want them to have that with me because I didn't want that boundary to be crossed. Okay. I didn't want to be contacted against my will. I didn't want to have text, even if it was just once in a while. Like, I didn't want bothered. I wanted complete and total no contact. So
gotcha. Okay.
So that's how that happened. But
complete and utter silence.
Right, for sure. Just so I could think, so I could heal, and so I could, you know, navigate my journey. But you know, have they went to therapy? Again, huge green flag. Good question to ask yourself. If the answer is yes, you can lean towards the idea of maybe breaking no contact. Have they started adopting healthy coping mechanisms to navigate this time of no contact? Right, like again, the example of, Are they surrounded by other people who are arguably just as toxic and make the same mistakes as them? He's going, oh, I'm so sorry. I just can't believe your kids would do this to you. My kids did the same thing. Gosh, how awful. Instead of sitting in a circle and being like, I wonder why we're in this position in our lives.
Yeah, that's probably a question people should ask themselves, too. If you find yourself surrounded by a lot of people, like, agreeing with you on things that probably aren't so great, i.e., in this case, like, hey, why do all of our kids decide they don't want to talk to us?
Right. Let's maybe try to figure out the answer.
Listen to Taylor Swift. Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me.
Wow.
Yes.
Good tune. Good tune. Yeah. And so, like I said at the beginning, a very justifiable and reasonable reaction to going no contact. But I do have to credit my parents. They did the work, and I told them that if they did the work, that I would be interested.
The work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have to admit there was a certain threshold of work that I felt like needed to or had to be done in order for me to feel like it was emotionally a reasonable decision for me to come back in contact with him. Because for a very long time, I didn't believe that, and they hadn't done that. Like, it wasn't necessarily like a specific, like, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, it was more of just like a thing that I felt emotionally. But, you can tell when people change, right? Like, even you being, at this point, buddy, like, we're best friends. We've been best friends for a long time.
We tell each other everything.
But, like, you could tell when I started changing, right? Like, it's not necessarily that I met some kind of specific threshold. It's just that you were like, wow, that guy's changing. Like, I don't know what he's doing yet, but I can tell, man, he is a different person. And that's all that happened, right? Like, I could see tangible things like changing in my parents' lives and the way they carried themselves and the way that their relationships otherwise were going. And, my parents pressed into things that made them happy. They pressed into themselves, which is what I told them to do. I said, hey, all the answers you are looking for, you will find within yourself.
That's it. That's interesting. And completely side note, but just
sure.
minor. It's like, you're right. You can notice people are changing. And I saw it tonight at dinner with my parents.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, my sister,
tell me about it, man.
My sister called it out, too.
Okay.
We were having a conversation about things that typically make my father uncomfortable.
Mic a little closer. It's just because of the rain.
The rain.
Yeah.
We were having a conversation with my father about things that typically make him uncomfortable. And she looks at me and goes, he's still engaged. And it was like, yeah, he is. It's not his cup of tea, but he's here.
Well, bravo,
he's
sir.
Having a conversation.
Bravo, Fareed's dad.
Thanks, Dad. Happy birthday. Yeah, you can definitely notice people are making changes. And I got to say, we should probably acknowledge that in people.
Yeah.
Give them their kudos.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I'm sure you've been doing that with your parents.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, give them that dopamine hit of, like, you did a good job.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that it does help spur the change further. Like, I will tell you that when I was making my major changes, my found family, Amanda, would sit there and
I love that episode, by the way, guys. We made an episode on found family. Oh, it's so good.
She would actively sit there and be like, you've changed.
Yep.
You are a different person.
Yep.
The person you are before is no longer here, and you're more engaged and easier to work with. And I was like, God, that felt good. And I can only imagine that when you're trying to encourage somebody to continue positive changes that will affect you and them, support it.
No doubt, man. Bravo. So maybe they've done some of these things. Like, say, maybe they've done one or multiple things off of this list that I've just discussed for the past couple minutes. Honestly, good for them. That's great. However, but does that mean that you can or that you should break your no contact, right? So ask yourself these questions. I put together a list of questions, and these are things that, like, maybe you wouldn't consider quite off the bat. Like, the things that I've mentioned before are, like, baseline, bare minimum stuff, like taking accountability, going to therapy, adopting healthy coping mechanisms. And these are very important things. Definitely start with these. But if you've answered yes to one or multiple of these and you're questioning, maybe I think I should, can I do it? Here are some questions to help you navigate that and better navigate to your final decision. Okay, so number one, what do I stand to gain from this relationship if it is reestablished? Again, might sound a little harsh, but a very important thing to consider, because let's recap here. You were the one that made the decision that for your better interest, you should go no contact. So make sure you think about, what do you stand to gain from rekindling this relationship? And by the way, it's okay if the answer is absolutely nothing, but make sure you're saying that from a place of peace and not anger, because there's a difference. There's a difference between saying I stand to gain nothing from rekindling this relationship out of frustration and out of maybe a wound that still hasn't healed, and saying like, hey man, I've really sincerely considered this. I've really exhausted my options here. I've ran what this might look like in my head. I just genuinely don't stand to gain anything from it. I know. The rain is so loud.
So intense.
I'm just trying to talk closer to my microphone so people... It might be really calming, hopefully, to listen to.
It's beautiful for me, but
yeah.
I think that's a great question to ask. But I think in any case, the answer is never, do I gain anything at all? You're always going to gain something or lose something, so you should be very careful. There will always be an effect of bringing someone back into your life.
Absolutely.
And it's never no effect.
Right.
It's either a positive or a negative one. But go ahead.
Oh, there's more. There's more. Trust me. Are you dying to just get back to some sense of normalcy, right? Like, are you tired of being super bummed on holidays and special occasions? Because, like, I'll admit, there was some of that for me. And, like, again, as you said, there's always going to be a cause and effect, right? Like, do I stand to gain something? Maybe. Am I tired of being bummed on the holidays, or, like, seeing the repercussions that's having on the rest of my family? Yeah, I kind of was. But I still, in the meantime, was considering what I had to gain from that and stuff. And the answer was still yes. So for me, I personally chose to move on to the next question. Oh, God, this one's so heavy. Is the lack of a healthy child-parent relationship showing up in other aspects of your life?
God.
And then I want to touch base specifically on the episode where you said, and I quote, "We subconsciously expect our future or current romantic partners to behave as our parents did." A dagger straight through the heart for me, because how true is that, right? And I put right below this, I said in parentheses, big yikes for me, as I realized I expect people to be secretive with their emotions and feelings, leaving me to figure out how they're feeling by other means, which isn't always true. But when it actually is, wow, it's super triggering. Like when people aren't upfront about their emotions or about what they're truly feeling or what they truly need to say, it's wildly triggering for me. But most of the time, people just either aren't feeling the feelings that I think that they are, or they just simply don't have the way to articulate it in the exact moment, and they just need a minute. Like, not everybody processes right in the exact moment, right? So, like, that is a huge aspect of my life, especially in romantic relationships where I have like this negative or lack of entirely. This child-parent relationship has horrifically affected other aspects of my life. And I also subconsciously adopted the idea that everyone, like my parents did, would all eventually fail me. Therefore, at the first indication of betrayal, whether legitimate or perceived on my end, I would pull the cord, not ask questions.
I remember that one.
Oh, yeah.
What did we call it?
The chopping block. Or the cutting block or the chopping block, yeah.
It was the chopping block.
At the first sign of betrayal or dishonesty or some kind of scenario where I felt like somebody wasn't being honest about their feelings or communicating with me, that's it. You were done. Because I was used to that with my parents. I was used to having to try to figure that out, and I didn't want to do that anymore, So, like I said, address the baseline ones that we talked about before, the taking accountability therapy, but like these questions are heavy hitters, man. These are real big heavy hitters, and believe me, I sat with these for every second of those 2 years that I was no contact with my parents, and these can change too, by the way. So that's an important thing to note too, is that these answers to these questions don't have to stay the same. If you get to number one and you say, what do I stand to gain from reestablishing this relationship, and it genuinely is nothing, okay, let's stop there. Continue the no contact, come back and revisit it later if you do so choose.
It's got to have an effect of some sort. I just don't see how it wouldn't.
And then number 3, this one is just something I put in there just to be considerate of people that do have kids. I, for clarification, don't have any, but I felt like this was a good thing to add. So number 3, maybe you have kids and you want to not have to explain the absolute disaster of a story that it was to grow up with the people that would be their grandparents. That's something to consider, right? Like, that's really hard to explain to a kid who has absolutely no perspective and no experience to justify and make this make sense. So you have to accept that that's going to create a hole. That's going to create like confusion in your own children's lives. And you're going to have to try to navigate that as gracefully as you can. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have a lot of advice for that, but it's something I wanted to mention for people who do have kids. And something else to consider is, are you in a place to accept that your parent or parents may treat your children in ways that you wish they would have treated you?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Or,
because that's a big one.
Or flip that. Treat your kids in ways they just don't meet the mark. And you're worried about the kids now, too.
Yeah. Like the kids being treated the same way, you mean?
The same way, yeah.
Yeah.
I was recently talking to somebody who was having a hard time, like, hey, my parents aren't treating my kids to the extent that I think that my kids need.
Wow.
And that's also, there's a flip side. There's two sides of that coin.
No, that's fair.
And so, yeah, it goes both ways.
No doubt. So, yeah, that was a heavy one. That was one that I wrote, and I was like, dang. I was like, even though I don't have kids, I'm like, gosh, I could imagine what that would feel like to, like, watch my parents be the parents to, my hypothetical kids that I wish they would have been to me. I think I'd have a hard time with that. So, another really important question to mull over for a little while. And 4, this one's, wow, this kind of touches base on what you were saying earlier of there being like cause and effect. 4 is, if things continue to play out as they are now, and God forbid something horrific happens, do you believe wholeheartedly that you can live with the consequences of having not spoken since the last time that you did, and not being able to say anything else beyond that point ever again? So like that kind of depends. Yeah.
Touches to death.
Yeah. And what did your no contact conversation look like? Did you even have a conversation? What was the last thing you said to your parents or, maybe your friend or whoever you're going no contact with? What did that look like? And that's a very real question to, consider. Are you okay with that? If that was the conversation that this person or these people went to their grave with, are you okay with that? And can you be at peace with that? Because that's a big question, man. So
God, that's a heavy one.
Oh, they're heavy, heavy, heavy hitters, man.
It's one of the reasons I don't think I could go no contact with my family, aside from the fact that
yep,
they're pretty solid towards me,
and that helps, right? That definitely helps. What? They're recording, buddy. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. But last time I recall, the batteries hold for about an hour.
Okay, yeah, we're at 41 minutes.
Exactly. And I know they're saying full power still. I don't believe it.
Okay.
So I'm just letting you know.
We're pretty close.
Okay.
We're near conclusion. Well, okay. Woo, no, we're not.
I was looking at this. I'm like, we're not near conclusion.
Oh, God.
And so I'm just letting you know. Yeah. You probably have about 10 minutes before those batteries go to like half and then less.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on them. Let's see. Let me get here. Oh, okay. So, you've pondered these questions. And by the way, there are no right answers to these questions. Like, these are simply questions that should trigger you, the listener, to really think hard about what your answers may look like. Again, they can change. They don't have to be absolute forever. But beware, longing for this, romanticized conversation with your birth givers or childhood bestie shouldn't motivate you to walk back into the hellfire of abuse with no reservations. I am not suggesting that by any stretch of the imaginations. Like, be honest with yourself. Take your time in answering these questions and truly decide if there is enough evidence of positive change in the excommunicated parties to justify the effort that will be required to rekindle a once tumultuous relationship. Or are you just bummed that some people suck and you wish they didn't? Very important distinction to make here.
That nostalgia can be very swaying.
Sure. Yeah, and this romanticized conversation that you think about where it's like your parents take all this accountability and they have done the work and they have done all these things. And believe me, there were times before that 2-year mark that I really wanted to rekindle and I really wanted to reconnect. But I'm going to be frank with you, man. It was just a place where I was bummed out that some people suck and I wish that they didn't, Now, thankfully, they dug their heels in and they took accountability and they did the work that they needed to do. But for the listeners and for the viewers, I want to reiterate, beware that longing for that romanticized conversation with either your birth givers or your childhood bestie should not motivate you to walk back into the hellfire of abuse with no reservations. Be honest, be diligent, but be open-minded enough to also, consider if there is possibilities for some of these questions to be yes. And there is possibility for you to give these people some credit that they have done some work. And, another thing I would like to, touch base on, specifically to my parents is that have my parents made a lot of progress? Yes. Yes, they have. But, will my parents ever be the parents that I wish that they were? No, they will not.
We discussed that one today.
That is the unfortunate truth. And that doesn't mean that there's no meat on the bone or that there's no opportunity for growth and complete and total healing and a rekindling of a really strong friendship. But the unfortunate truth is the ship has sailed, my friend. I'm a grown man. I'm 27 years old. Like that. That
time is gone.
That time has come and gone, But I do have a choice now to enjoy that relationship with them for what it can be. So with that being said, just be careful, guys. And again, just keep yourself in consideration and keep your safety in check and make sure all of these boxes are being checked before you decide to go back to no contact. But with that being said, I also encourage you to find reasons why you should break the no contact and get back in touch with people that mean a lot to you.
It's been very valuable to you, I'd say.
Oh, already. It hasn't even been that long. We've only been in therapy for a few months, and it's already been fantastic.
Yeah.
So in the first episode, we'll touch base on some boundaries. Because, again, that was a lot of the reasons why I went no contact. I set boundaries. I said, hey, you're doing this that hurts me. I don't want you to do it anymore. Kept doing it. I said, okay, well, this is what's going to happen if you keep crossing that boundary. Boundary kept getting crossed. I went no contact. So
chopping block.
Yeah. So let's see. Personally, yeah, I changed my number. I wrote that down here. Yeah. So I said that earlier, but I said personally, I changed my number. And I know you may think how harsh, but when setting boundaries, it's important to remember nobody has to agree. The worst thing someone could say when you're setting a boundary with them is, I don't agree with that. You don't have to. And I'm not asking you to agree. You just have to respect the boundary. So that's a very important distinction with setting boundaries. And it doesn't have to be nice, okay? Like, this is about you doing what is best for you and having your needs met. So as a review, boundaries, I think we've touched base on this in a few different episodes, but as a review, boundaries should look like this. Are you guys ready? When you do this, it makes me feel this way. I do not want you to do / say said examples anymore. If you do, this is going to happen. That's it. No more, not I don't agree, not I think that's harsh, not how could you do that to your parents. None of that. If you continue to do said example, this is what is going to happen. So an example here is, when my parents acted like I was a stranger who never called and said, son, I don't have a son. Who is this? Insinuating that I just couldn't be bothered to call, even though we both know how a phone works both ways. And I'm an adult with my own life who is busy, dealing with my own life struggles big time, especially back then, and could use a random, hey, I'm thinking of you text or call as well, without me, the child, by the way, always having to initiate any form of contact or, Christ forbid, intimacy of like, hey, I'm thinking about you and I love you. Are you triggered yet? Cool, me either. Next bullet point.
Firing all cylinders here today.
Dude, I'm telling you, right? I'm not triggered. That's fine. Everything's fine. Next bullet point. Leave it alone, Freed. I'm kidding. So once boundaries are set, they may need to be enforced, which is, again, like I said, doesn't mean you have to keep reestablishing that boundary. It's more of a reminder of like, maybe if you're feeling graceful, one reminder of like, hey, remember that boundary we talked about? I told you what was going to happen if you kept crossing that boundary. I'm reminding you one time out of the goodness of my heart, and it is okay to do that. I'm not saying, but like there's a really, really, really thin.
I'd say it goes more based on your threshold.
Yeah.
It's up to you, man, how often you have to remind somebody. If you feel like you shouldn't have to remind them more than once, that's one thing. And if you feel like you can remind them a few times here and there, that's another thing. And you have to realize that, like, the way you enforce your boundaries has consequences as well.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, like, it's just a matter of understanding that for every action, there's a potential reaction. And can you live with the consequences of it?
I think there's a real paper thin line there, specifically when you said there's a potential consequence or reaction if you keep crossing that boundary. Like, again, to reiterate, like, boundaries are a very hard line in the sand, or at least that's how they should be. I think that there is a very paper thin line that lies between being kind and like reestablishing a boundary and a friendly reminder and getting walked all over like a doormat.
I will say that I think there's one of those topics that requires a certain amount of nuance. Do not become the person that is so unflexing and unbending that like, I drew a boundary and that's it. And you have to accept it. And then like, you become the problem.
There is potential for danger. That's fair.
Easily twist this into a person that just has no give.
Yeah.
No flex. And then you are just alone.
Right.
And that becomes a you problem because the world isn't always the problem. But like that's the other side of the coin that I wanted to mention.
No, that's fair. A very reasonable point. But if your boundaries are enforced, you've done it more than once, especially if you've done it more than once, and they aren't respected and they're constantly being crossed, then that is all the grounds you need to pull the plug, sweetie. You've done your part. Go ahead. You can, without a guilty conscience, pull the plug just for the validation of people who maybe are trying to set a boundary, a specific one boundary that consistently is not being respected, right? Like,
Agreed.
I agree with you. If it's like setting all these boundaries, but what you're actually doing is building a wall around you, like there is a difference. And I'll give you that. In today's case, though, like I said, a little more optimistic. I still, and that's reasonable, man. I'm still actively working on this. I'm still actively working on not being triggered as easily. I'm still actively working on letting my parents back into my life. I'm still actively working on showing them that grace and that mercy and seeing them as human beings that did the best that they could with the awareness and the information that they had at the time, right? So I
think what we're trying to say is that none of this is black and white.
Oh, no.
There's nuanced shades of gray and colors.
Absolutely. Always is, man. So, I'm very prepared to have the comments of like, no, you're still triggered. Maybe you're still being a harsh little asshole or something like. I'm very prepared for those kind of reactions from people.
The truth is, though, that at times you will be the person.
Yeah.
You will be the asshole. You will be the person that's triggered. You will be the person that's being too much of a nanny pansy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you get the moment to kind of catch yourself and reflect. And like, maybe I did. Maybe I did go a little too hard there. Like I had a conversation with you about it today, right? Where I was reading you something. I was like, this makes me feel bad.
Yeah.
And am I being too much of a triggered person to deal with this properly?
Yeah.
Or did this person have justification? Am I justified?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it came down to like I was justified in some ways, but there were definitely places where I could improve.
Yeah.
And I just needed like an objective eye.
Yeah. For sure. So maybe your parents, and / or other family members, or this friend or friends have gone to therapy, taken accountability, managed to get almost all of their shit together, and maybe show some sign of hope. You've heard about it, seen it with your own eyes, and you say, hey, I might be ready for this. So you pull up your bootstraps and you say, I'm ready to give them my phone number and have hours-long phone calls all the time and just catch up. Except wait. That sounds like a bit much, doesn't it? And you'd be right. Maybe. Unless that really does sound like, a perfect plan for you specifically, and that looks like your healing journey, and that sounds good, then go ahead. But breaking no contact might more closely look like sending a letter in the mail without writing down your return address so that you cannot be located or bothered against your will. Very real situation.
This feels like you got this from like a book or something.
No.
This is all you?
No, this is all just like things I thought of or experienced personally.
Ladies and gentlemen, my buddy is a genius and he's handsome.
So yeah, it might more closely look like that. Sending that letter and purposefully not writing your return address down so that you can't be bothered or sent mail or contacted or have people show up at your residence against your will. Very real and very reasonable thing to do, but still reaching out, sending that letter saying, hey, I'm thinking of you. Lots of people reach out this way. Adding people back on Facebook or Facebook Messenger, but not giving them your phone number or unblocking them on social media quite yet. That's a very reasonable way to reestablish contact without having to completely open your doors. Sending memes back and forth in a group therapy sessions. This can be a really good way to kind of lighten the mood and the tension. I've done that with my own father. We've sent some things like, that man is just an absolute psychopath about his garden. Oh my God, he could feed a village. That man, and he does. He feeds many people in his church and in his groups. Like, he grows an unreasonable amount of food. It's insane. I'm telling you.
What does he grow?
Everything. Squash, zucchini, lettuce, corn, tomatoes, green beans, potatoes. Like, everything. The man has a green thumb. He always has.
That's pretty cool.
Always, like, and I don't mean like a couple little Walmart bags full. No, I mean like 10 5-gallon buckets worth of vegetables.
Buddy, that's not a garden; it's a farm.
That's it. Well, to be fair, it is a farm. He does have a farm.
Let's not set false expectations here.
Yeah.
He's just a farmer.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably has a tractor and everything too.
Right.
What?
No, it's not that big.
Okay.
No, this is like hand tiller. This is like, hand digging rows. Like, absolutely, yeah. He's something.
You should give our buddy John a call.
He is something else.
Mr. Deere would like to help him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Deere would like to help him. So anyway, whatever breaking no contact looks like for you, just know that it doesn't have to follow like any specific order, rules, or boundaries other than the ones that you see fit. Do what's best for you, your health,
Yes.
and ultimately your sanity, right?
Yes.
Rekindling a broken relationship can be the most terrifyingly vulnerable thing that you can do. But just know that if you put in the work, take the time to be honest with yourself and answer these previous questions that I discussed, and make some informed decisions, the outcome will very likely lead you to growth, to an expansion of your empathy and capacity for love in far more aspects than you could have ever imagined. Like I touched base on how it was affecting romantic relationships. So, it's a lot. There's a lot to consider. Man, there's so much to consider. And going no contact and breaking no contact are two decisions that I definitely don't try to convince people of one way or the other. This is just my decision. This is my experience, and this is what it's looked like for me. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and there's certainly no right or wrong ways, but just make sure that in the midst of all this, you're considering yourself and you're considering the consequences of one way or the other. But
I want to throw something in there too. That breaking the no contact rule brings up something very delicate, which is vulnerability.
Oh yeah.
And I've had this conversation quite a few times with a few people in the last week.
Yeah.
Which is really surprising that the people in general are just terrified of being vulnerable. And I'd like
another thing to add to that. Go keep going.
I'd like to remind you that, again, vulnerability is what's going to bring you to the next thing.
Yeah.
And we fear pain, and that's what vulnerability opens us up to.
Yep.
The risk of pain that we may not feel we are equipped to deal with is on one side of the vulnerable coin.
Yep.
But on the other side of that coin is bliss and joy and trust.
And healing. And like I said,
healing.
like the expansion of your empathy and capacity for love. And I'll admit it, man, for a long time and for a good part of that 2 years, I was no contact because I couldn't. I didn't have the capacity to handle the pain. I just didn't.
And I want to encourage people. There's like a lesson here.
Yeah.
It's that don't shy or fear the pain.
Yeah.
In general, vulnerability is a good thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I would care to say, and I'm having to exercise this now.
Yeah.
It's that I'd rather be vulnerable and get hurt. I'll take the pain.
Yeah.
Than avoid even the possibility of winning because I was too afraid of being hurt.
Yeah.
I would encourage people in general to work your way to become a person that can deal with and tolerate pain. Pain is not a bad thing.
Yeah,
it is simply a reminder that something didn't go quite right.
Well, it's a catalyst for growth. I know a person that has on their forearms, "Welcome to Pain, Life is Difficult."
Yeah.
It's from a book called The Road Less Traveled. Super awesome book if you guys haven't read it, but like a very...
I'm just saying that throughout this podcast, like a lot of this is talking about your soft spot, your underbelly.
Yeah.
It's deciding what your thresholds for pain are. And that your vulnerability will dictate what boundaries you draw. They will dictate who you have to go no contact with for how long.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of that should be tempered by how much pain can you work with and how much pain are you willing to deal with.
Yeah.
And then which side of the reward are you willing to fall on. Like sometimes you fall on the sword and it just happens. and you bleed out a little bit. Like, it is what it is. But like, if you're willing to accept it, it benefits you tremendously.
Yeah.
And remind yourself, this is the important part, is becoming a person that can deal with pain.
Yep.
Is that you become a person that can also pick yourself back up, recognize it didn't kill you, and keep going.
Yep.
And that's what I think is so important in this episode.
Absolutely. So yeah, definitely more of a gray answer. So, you know, there's a lot of work for you, the listener, to do. Hopefully these questions have at least given you a good starting point. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's all inclusive and that it's definitely every single thing you need to consider when maybe breaking no contact or going no contact. But hopefully you guys have found at least a really good starting point to make one decision in one way or the other. But with that being said, we love you guys. My name's Devon. This is Fareed. We're the Little Pricks, and we bid you good luck and endless love.
Adios.
Good night, guys.